When is striving to be in control out of control? We need constancy in our life. We also need autonomy to find out who we are. Some people like to be in control of their grades, some of their social lives, and some of their appearance. But when is control too much? And how can control relate to eating disorders? My experience and a year and a half of treatment have taught me that eating disorders are a symptom, covering up a whole load of internal conflict. In my case, behind the diagnosis was an urgency to be in complete control. Dealing with the loneliness of lockdown, post-traumatic stress, swimming training being cancelled, and the crippling perfectionism I convinced myself to live by, I felt my life was out of control. I wanted something that would help me deal with my consuming emotions, so I turned to the one thing that makes us humans feel safe: food. But I ate far too much than my body was designed to cope with. I binged, and instead of gaining control, I lost it. It became an addiction that numbed my thoughts, and it was also a cycle that drove me further and further away from control. Inevitably, I gained weight, and just like society had wrongfully taught me, I was disgusted by my body. And yet, the main reason I couldn't stand to look at myself in the mirror was because this weight gain was a materialized representation of a loss of control, the trait I longed for the most. So, it had never even occurred to me to diet, but I turned to food in the form of restriction. I have always had the toxic goal of wanting to be the best. In my swim team, in my class, even in my friend groups. And in the depths of my binge void, I felt I was no longer the best in any of those things. In fact, I felt I was the worst. And on top of that, I also hated my body. I know there's nothing better about being in a smaller body, but with the unrealistic beauty standards and toxic diet culture of today's society, naive 13-year-old me had no way of knowing that. So I settled my goal of having a smaller body. Not a great way of getting back in control. I convinced myself I would be a failure if I didn't lose weight. And I don't know how I determined my self-worth based on how much space I took up. But further, it staggers me how distant I saw the possibility of returning to the things that I used to love. So much so that I thought the only thing I could gain control upon was the size of my body. So I went from binging to restricting, both as bad as each other. Reducing my food intake helped me deal with life by paring it down to a strict set of rules. What I could eat, when I could eat, how much exercise I had to do, and how to punish myself if I broke a rule. Before I knew it, binging bled out of my life, and anorexia took a hold of it. I could no longer bring myself to care about gymnastics, swimming, scouts, even school, or being kind, all the things that used to bring me together as a human being. The only thing I cared about were my destructive rules related to my artificial body image. Anorexia was like a sick voice in my head, making every wrong decision for me, and it was giving me a false sense of control. A year later, I still thought I was in control, even when I hated my emaciated body and the miserable life I was leading. My grades plummeted, and I lost my spot for an exchange, something that I had been waiting for so long. I also was very miserable, and my body physically suffered the effects of not eating properly because I was cold all the time, and my heart stopped beating properly. I had an extremely supportive family, but at the time the help wasn't any use because I wasn't ready to let go of the comfort of my eating disorder. I wasn't ready to let go of the euphoric feeling of hunger, the pain after over-exercising, and the strange relief I got when collapsing after standing up too quickly. In my mind, letting go of those things meant losing control, and that was the number one rule I could never break. I could never lose control. I wish more than anything I'd accepted the help I was offered before I got so physically unwell. And now I'd like to share a diary entry that I made when I was in one of my lowest points. May 8th of 2021. I'm sick of being stuck in this hospital bed. I miss the sun and the wind, something else I took for granted. I feel as if these gross beige walls are closing in on me. I open the window to see if the breeze makes me feel better. A few stories below, I see people crossing the roads, and going in and out of stores. That's nice. I wonder if I'll ever be normal again. I wonder if I'll ever have this yellow hose removed from my nose, and if I'll ever go back to school. Maybe in the future I can read this and say that I'm not as sad, but to be honest, I don't really care anymore. 16 months later, I can finally say that I'm not as sad. I was genuinely so depressed back then, and I couldn't picture a happy life. But I'm here, I made it, and so can you. With the immense support of my family, my doctors, and the best people I met at treatment, I'm now in a healthier and happier body. I talk all about my recovery in a book I wrote for my personal project named It's More Than Just Eating, because indeed it is. Ignorantly, I used to believe that eating disorders were all about losing weight and that recovery was all about gaining it back. But after all this experience, now I know that recovery is about putting in the work to achieve a healthy mindset and a good relationship with food. And this is why I hadn't immediately recovered after being in hospital, because yes, I gained weight, consequentially reducing impacts related to being underweight. But I still had an anorexic mindset despite being in a healthy body. I wasn't ready to accept that food was good for me because I wasn't the one making the choice to eat, my doctors were, and I still had a very long journey ahead of me, but things started to get better. A phrase I liked to go by during my recovery was nourish to flourish. After so long, nourishing my body properly felt wrong, it felt unfamiliar, and I didn't want to do it. But I constantly had to remind myself of the reason I was doing this. I had to push past the immense fear of food, the voices telling me I'm not worthy of anything if I'm not in an extremely underweight body. I had to accept that I needed to recover because I wanted my life to flourish. Now I'd like to share 3 things that I wish the people around me knew while I was recovering. And firstly, to friends of people with eating disorders. Most disordered behaviors seem very unreasonable, and they are. Throwing up, over-exercising, and restricting for hours, even days on end. But they can be slightly justified by negative comments surrounding food, bodies, and self-esteem, so it's best not to mention these topics, especially in a negative light. For example, as someone who's trying to fix their relationship with food, it can be very disheartening to hear someone talk about how they shouldn't be eating a certain amount of food, or how they need to exercise after having this, or how they should skip lunch because they had a big snack. These comments reinforce the importance of weight in society, when all people in recovery want to do is break free from that toxicity. And second, to parents of people with eating disorders. In my experience, it was quite harmful when my parents, with the best intention, went against me for not wanting to eat. It was much better for the both of us when they went against the eating disorder instead. For example, instead of telling me how irrational I was for not wanting to have the last bite of food, it was so much better when they reminded me of how irrational the eating disorder was being and how important it is for me to fight those urges so that I can get on with my life, instead of blaming me for something that I had no choice in. And lastly, to anyone struggling with food. Recovery can seem like an eternally torturous journey of convincing yourself to have breakfast when your brain is screaming at you to skip it, and sometimes seeing your body gain weight after getting so used to trying your best to shrink it. But recovery is so much more than that. Recovery is allowing your body to rest after so long of exercising it beyond its breaking point. Recovery is also dancing around the kitchen waiting for your favorite food. Recovery is being able to go on family dinners, despite how terrified you may be of them. Recovery is so life-giving and it's beautiful. You can also participate in class and talk to your teachers and learn things instead of going over and over in your head how many calories you've had in the past week. Recovery is amazing, and anyone struggling with food deserves it. And lastly, I'd just like to say that I'm sorry. Not because I think that my eating disorder was my fault, but because I know that I was turned into a vacant, lifeless, unpleasant, and unloving version of myself, and I know that that hurt those around me. But I also know that everything that the people closest to me did was because they wanted me to get better. So especially to my parents, I want to say thank you.